Welcome to the Friday edition of Once World. On Tuesday I said I might do some cooking today. Well, I'm not going to. I'm going to follow on, sort of, from my discussion on Tuesday. On Tuesday I was looking at the problems of rejection when you publish a book. Well, now I'm going to look at another side of publishing, which is kind of like, I don't know how to quite put it except to say that in order to write an academic book anyway, you have to be able to think critically. Well, how do you think critically? Let's talk about that. I think it was Oscar Wilde who said something to the effect that anything worth learning can't be taught. And that's especially true of critical thinking. It's not, I don't know whether it's impossible, but it's very difficult to teach the elements of critical thinking, partly because critical thinking itself is not very well understood. The way I've always thought about it is to ask the question, why? And this goes back to my own schooling back in England in the 1960s. I was 16 years old. I was taking what are called O-levels, that is the first set of state exams that you take. And you can either leave school at 16 or you can go on to do A-levels. The O-level is ordinary level, A-level is advanced level, and you typically do about 8 O-levels. It could be anywhere from, would be English, mathematics, a language, usually French. I took Latin, mathematics, physics, chemistry, geography, history, so on. And my history teacher was the headmaster of my school, which was a big surprise. We weren't expecting that, because our history master the previous years had been a nice guy, but he couldn't really teach. he just laid out stuff for us to learn, which is not critical thinking. Well, then, first day of classes, the headmaster comes into our class and he sits down and he knows that we've studied the agrarian revolution and the industrial revolution in the late 18th, early 19th centuries the previous year. And so he sits down and he says, okay, why did the Industrial Revolution happen when it happened, and why did it happen in Britain? And, we all put up our hands, because we'd all been given these, what we used to call the 20 causes. Like if you can rattle off the 20 causes of something, then you could have a good essay. That's what my geography teacher used to say about geography essays. Like, quite literally he used to say, like, mark each paragraph, firstly, secondly, thirdly. Like, if you want to get 100 points out of 100, then list 20 things, you get 5 points. I mean, it was all very doctrinaire. But the headmaster asked that question, and we thought we had the answers, So, I mean, one of the commonest and probably the stupidest answers was in the 19th century there was a wave of inventors. Now, a wave of inventors is a specific example of the generic wave of something, that historians used to actually lampoon in the famous book 1066 and all that. They always talk about a wave of something, a wave of invaders or whatnot, and it's stupid. And the headmaster pointed that out. He said a wave of inventors, and well, haven't there always been smart people? Like, why was the 19th century the time when smart people came to the fore? And another one put up their hand, said something like abundant resources of coal and iron in England. And he said, well, hasn't that always been there? I mean, it didn't just suddenly appear in the 19th century. They've always had coal. They've always had iron ore, and so on. And he just tore everything apart. And I was just gobsmacked. It's like, what? Like everything's been undone. I've been learning all this stuff by rote, and he's asking the question, why? Why did it happen? Well, that was, let me think, I was 16 years old, so that was almost 60 years ago, and I still don't know the answer. I mean, I'm a lot closer, and I've got a lot better ideas about how to pursue the topic, but it's still an interesting question, and it's still a question that historians fight over, and probably will fight over long before I'm pushing up daisy roots. That's critical thinking. That's moving beyond remembering stuff and working towards figuring out why it happened. Now, the reason I want to get to this is because just last week I came across this odd YouTube channel talking about pedagogy, and the persons who ran the channel was talking about the 6 levels of education. And I thought, oh, that's interesting. I'll take a look at these 6 levels. And it turns out that this is a very old idea proposed by a guy called Benjamin Bloom in the 1940s, or late 1940s anyway, post-war, but had a series of conferences on how to improve education in the United States. And Bloom came up with these 6 levels of education that sort of built on each other. Like the bottom was the most basic, and then as you got higher and higher, you got more sophisticated. And I'll go into it briefly. I'll show you, if I can, here on plastered on my face probably, I don't know, his taxonomy, but I'll go through it explaining a little bit more. So at the bottom is remember. So your teacher gives you a ton of facts and you learn them, and that's it. That's all you do, is you just learn the information. So for example, that Britain declared war on Germany in 1939, or Duke William of Normandy crossed the Channel to England in 1066 and conquered the whole nation. And so it's just information. And a lot of people believe that that's what history is a bunch of facts, but it isn't. And there's an old movie called The Paper Chase. You may have come across it. John Houseman represents a contract law professor at Harvard, and one of the students in the class at one point explains that he can remember everything, like he's got a photographic memory or whatever. And Haussmann just says, well, that's useless. Just knowing things, just remembering things, doesn't do you any good at all. You've got to be able to use that information productively. Right? But that's the baseline, is, remembering things. And quite frankly, the bulk of O levels was rote learning and regurgitating. Okay, the next level is understanding. That is, you not only learn certain pieces of information, but you understand what that information means or implies. I've got an article somewhere here that says that level 1 remembering would be something like learn the various varieties of apples. Understanding would be knowing what the differences matter, like why one is different from another. And then the third level up is applying. And the best way I can think about this in simple terms is in mathematics. So that, again, in O-level mathematics, you have to do algebra and you have to solve quadratic equations. So that your teacher will say, okay, to solve a quadratic equation, you need to turn it into factors, and then you use those factors to solve for x or whatever. So you learn the process, you understand the process, and then you apply it. And I can think about a lot of areas of mathematics where I could not really get to the point of application, and that was particularly true of calculus. If I was given a fixed problem in calculus, I could solve it. If somebody said, okay, well, here is dx by dy, blah 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 blah. Solve for x. I could do that, but I couldn't take calculus and apply it to something else that didn't have anything to do with the classroom. If I was trying to just solve a problem in anthropology, I couldn't really apply calculus to it. I couldn't get to that stage. So application is the most important part of understanding. You not only understand the process, but you know how to use it in new situations. Give a very simple example. Let's say that you know that the distance between here and the center of Phnom Penh is 10 kilometers, and you can ride your bicycle from here to the center of Phnom Penh in 42 minutes. What is your speed? Well, you know that speed is distance divided by time. And basically your speed is 10 kilometers per 41 minutes. But if you understand the process, you can understand how to convert that from the simple example of 10 kilometers and 41 minutes into kilometers per hour. All right, so that's application. But then you get even higher, and then it starts getting a little bit squirrely. But the part that I want to really focus on, the next level up is called analysis or analyze, where you try to put the what you've learned into a context that is okay. So you know about let's say, the difference in kinds of apple, um, you then put that in the context of digestion or other fruits and so forth. And then the next level is evaluate, which I think is really important, because this is the one where you say, why does it matter? Why do I need to know the difference between a cooking apple and an eating apple? Well, one of the reasons is because you want to make an apple pie. And then the very top level is called create, and that means to develop hypotheses, new hypotheses, things that people have not developed before, based on what you already know. All right, well, that's Bloom's taxonomy. And it's kind of interesting, but I'm not convinced. And I'm not convinced for a couple of reasons. One of them is that these are not like levels that you ascend like a ladder. Like, you don't start off learning by rote, and then you start understanding, and then you start applying, and so forth. Like, you can go all the way to evaluate fairly quickly, and people do. I mean, you can be like, I don't know, you can be in the first few years of secondary school, and you can be asking, why do I have to learn Pythagoras' theorem? Why do I have to know that? I mean, there are good answers to that, but that's something that maybe a 12-year-old can begin with. Very, very few people are going to be able to get to the create stage of being able to hypothesize new relationships, new ideas. I mean, that's really postgraduate kind of work. But not always. I mean, sometimes that can happen at a younger age. But what I'm getting at is that this does not really fully articulate what critical thinking, or creative thinking for that matter, but what critical thinking really is. I mean, I suppose that it mostly has to do with the levels of evaluation and analysis. And I don't know how you teach that. The only way that I've ever tried to teach critical thinking is by doing it out loud in my classes. So I would, for example, take something like Max Weber's Protestant Ethic and the Spirit of Capitalism, where he says that capitalism developed in Germany and Britain in the 19th century because, no, wait a minute, that's not right. I'm still thinking about the Industrial Revolution. In the 16th century, because the Protestant way of thinking leads directly to capitalism, and it's a very complicated argument. But simply put, he said that the basic point was proposed by the theologian Calvin, who suggested that because God knows everything, past, present, and future, he knows whether you're going to heaven or hell before you've even lived. I mean, he knows before you're even born. It's called predestination. Like, your destiny is fixed, and you can't do anything about it. Which is very different from the Roman Catholic mentality, which is if you sin, you go to the priest, you confess, you get told to do some penance, you get forgiven, and you're all clean, you're all ready to go. So as long as you die having confessed and to the priest and everything, you're fine. Whereas predestination says you will not ever know whether you're going to heaven or hell until you die and you face your Maker. But He knows. and the only way that you can relieve the anxiety is by treating your life as if you are destined to go to heaven. Well, how do you do that? Well, first of all, he says you have to be austere. You have to work hard. And what do you have to work hard at? Well, Martin Luther has this notion of vocation, like that everyone is given a gift by God or by the Holy Spirit, and that your task is to find your vocation and then to work hard at it, and that will ensure that your anxiety is reduced because you know you're on the right path. If you don't follow your vocation, then you know you're doomed. And then the last piece is that you have to not be ostentatious. You have to be puritanical. So you work hard at your vocation, the thing that you're good at. Let's say it's a shoemaker or a goldsmith or a teacher. and you work hard at it, and what happens? You make money. Right? You're the best tailor in the country, and everyone comes to you for suits and jackets and so forth because you're such a good tailor and you work so hard. You work all the time. You make a lot of money. But you can't spend it, because if you spend it, then you're being frivolous. You're not being puritanical. You're not being holy. And so what do? You invest that money in your business, and it grows, and you make more money, and it grows, and so you become a capitalist. That's Weber's thesis in a nutshell. Well, what I would do is I would present that to a class. They'd read the book, and then I'd say, okay, well, let's think about this. Is he on the right track or not? And I would just, stand in front of the class and just pick holes in his arguments in various places. And, also I commend him on parts where he was, I think, on the right track. So I would do by show, I would show how to think critically by doing it myself. But I couldn't ever tease out the components that would allow the students to do it in the way that Bloom's taxonomy suggests. That you go from this level to this level to this level. I don't know how to do that. How do you? I know how to ask the question why. I don't always know how to answer it. That's critical thinking, and in order to do that, among other things, you have to know a lot of stuff, right? So remembering is always going to be really important. You have to have a pile of information in your head, and not in books, not in libraries. Yes, it's important. Like if you need to know something that you can't remember, go to a book and look it up. But when it comes to critical thinking, you've got to have all that stuff in your head at the same time, so that you can swirl it all around. And some people are just not good at that. Some people have very little memory, and some of them have very fixed ideas about how things work. And I take, for example, if you own a car and it won't start. Well, one of the things that people do is they just keep cranking. They put the key in the ignition and they turn it on, and usually it goes boom and starts. But today you go out and you turn this key and it doesn't start. So what do? Well, you turn the key again, and then you turn the key again. And that's all that some people do. They don't have any understanding. They don't have any knowledge about the engine, about how it works. They don't know how to get out and and open up the engine and look inside and see is everything working properly and so forth. They don't know. All they know how to do is just crank, 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 crank until the battery dies, and then they call AAA or somebody to come and fix the car. And there's a lot of thinking is that way. Like why did the Industrial Revolution happen in Britain in the 19th century? Don't know. It did. How do you answer that question? That requires critical thinking, and I can tell you my process. I'm not going to. I'm going to finish here shortly, but Bloom's taxonomy doesn't help. All it does is it tells you the different aspects of thinking, and how do you teach these? How do you teach evaluation? How do you teach analysis? How do you teach creativity? The simple answer is I don't really know. I just try to be creative. I try to be analytic. I try to be evaluative out loud as I do in these videos, and hope for the best. All right, so that's Friday. I hope you have a good weekend. Please tell your friends about my videos. Please like, please subscribe, and I'll see you on Tuesday. I'm hoping to have a recipe on Tuesday. My oven just died. I made a nice shepherd's pie yesterday, and when I came to reheat it, the oven wouldn't work. And it's 6 years old, so I'm due to replace it. So sometime or other this week, I'm gonna go and get a new one, and maybe I'll show you on Tuesday, and I'll bake something for you. Have a great weekend.